89.1 KMUW, NPR for Wichita, a service of Wichita State University. Up now, KMUW editorial commentator Richard Crowson says something doesn't feel quite right about summer this year.
Crowson says that one of our elected officials is acting like one of the main characters from a very KMUW. Up next, KMUW commentator Richard Crowson has a new spin on a classic folk song.
With apologies to old Woody Guthrie, this land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Well, I came out here for the job at the Wichita Eagle when I got hired on there in, that was 87 when I started. Before I came here for the job interview and the subsequent job, I really didn't know too much about Wichita except the stereotypical stuff. But I had never been even in the state of Kansas before I came out here for the job interview. It was all a big, almost blank mystery to me when I did finally come out. My first impressions of Wichita when I came out for the job interview at the Eagle were that it was a aircraft city. It was such a center of that industry. Immediately, a sort of a positive vibe of what Wichita is like. Admittedly, when they bring you in for a job interview, they show you the best parts of the city and they talk it up. One of the first things I noticed about Wichita as I drove around town was that the sun is always in your eyes almost, it seemed to me. It was like, this is kind of weird. I'm not used to this. It was kind of a positive thing to me because it was like I equate sunshine with positivity and a good vibe, and I kind of liked that. So it's all positive and good, but I did just get a good feeling about Wichita. I remember learning that Wichita has more sunny days every year on average than Miami, Florida, and that's kind of astounding. I don't think many people know that. I consider myself an adopted Kansas person, because I've been here so long. And I remember driving around town, and this is kind of weird, but I remember seeing walking down the street a couple of times a mixed race couple, African American and a white person, and holding hands or whatever, obviously being a couple. And I remember thinking, this is really cool. I don't know that I've encountered this all that much in Tennessee, back in my home state of Tennessee. So I was kind of welcoming to that feeling and that progressivism. I still think, in spite of all the recent, and I mean by that in the last 10 to 15 years, conservative extremism that Kansas has sort of become the poster child for nationally, I still think Kansas is not as conservative a state as the image it has is. To me, Kansas is Nancy Kassebaum and Bob Dole. That's Kansas to me. Both of them would be considered flaming liberals by some local politicians and state politicians nowadays. But I still think that's the heart of Kansas. I think it's a fairly progressive state in that way. When I first came to the Eagle, it was because I heard about a job opening in the newsroom for a newsroom artist. I had a good friend that I worked with in Jackson at the Jackson Sun, and he had contacted me and said, hey, there's a job opening for a newsroom artist. I was looking more towards finding a job as a political cartoonist, but I did a little research and realized that Eagle was a pretty good-sized newspaper, and yet it did not have a political cartoonist. So I thought, okay, here's what I'll try to do. I'll come in as a newsroom artist and try to work my foot in the door to an editorial cartooning job. And it took me about I came, interviewed, got the job, worked in the newsroom as a newsroom artist for about a year, and I began lobbying the editorial page editor, George Naval, and the editor at that time, Buzz Merritt, and talking to them about trying to start a position for political cartoonist at the Eagle. And eventually was successful with that effort. So they moved me into the editorial cartooning job. So I guess technically I'm the first, I was the first full-time political cartoonist that the Eagle ever had in all of its long history. They had other editorial cartoonists, but they were all sort of part-timers who did other chores at the paper in addition to occasional editorial cartoons. And I don't like to brag, but I do feel kind of a little bit of pride about the fact that I started that position at the Eagle, even though, of course, technically right now it doesn't have a full-time cartoonist like most newspapers don't anymore. But anyway, yeah, that was kind of how that all came about. Like I said, George Naval, one of the original amazing, most eccentric characters on the face of the earth, was the editorial page editor. I loved George, and he irritated the hell out of me occasionally, but anybody that ever worked with him or around him or knew him knows what I'm talking about. He was quite a character. But it was fun to become the first person in this job, and to sort of be able to not have anything to live up to, just be able to sort of set the standard, if you will, for what an editorial cartoonist does in Wichita. And I had a little bit of, had some, I was a little anxious about it, because I knew that this city had never had an editorial cartoonist, and that can be kind of jolting to people when there's this guy shooting his mouth off every day in the newspaper, graphically about the news. There was a lot of complaining, because I've always been a proponent of the idea that an editorial cartoonist expresses a strong opinion, not a wishy-washy one, but a strong one, one side or the other. And people were not used to seeing that about their Kansas elected officials and their local elected officials. And so it took a little while to kind of break the community into the idea that this rabble-rouser was drawing cartoons about some of them, but it happened eventually. And it was fun being on that sort of cutting edge of political satire in Wichita at that time. There are lots of different ideas that people have about what an editorial cartoonist does. Some people think that we're just mouthpieces for the publisher or the powers that be at the newspaper, and some people think that, I don't know what some people think. Actually, some people just think that we're just loud mouths and need to be shut up. So they're all over the spectrum that way. The traditional job of an editorial cartoonist over the centuries, actually, you're expressing a strong political opinion, one way or the other, on a subject that's in the news. You are vilifying some people, and jealousizing or giving sainthood to others. It's a very black and white sort of world that editorial cartoonists kind of have to live in. There's no ambivalence. There are lots of subjects that I think are very complicated that I have to just simplify in a cartoon, and literally, for many years, black and white it. I have to say it's either this way or it's this way, even though I sometimes feel like, man, there's a little wiggle room there. It's not quite one or the other, but that's what cartoonists do. It's been called the strength and the weakness of editorial cartooning. The fact that we are very polarized in our thinking, or we have to be in our drawings anyway. That's offensive to some people, but it also gives your cartoon impact, visual impact, and there are tons of things to be said about that whole subject of visual impact and what that's all about and why it works. We're these weird animals who draw these pictures about the news that sort of cut around all the intellectualizing about an issue and sort of cut to the chase. Visually, I've always thought of it as being a way of sort of short-circuiting a reader's impression about a subject. We short-circuit the reader. We go right straight to the heart of the matter, and we either say yes or no on whatever the issue is. There's a lot of repetition. When I draw some characters, I always draw them the same way. I might put an inside joke about that character into my depiction of them every time I draw them. The primary example that comes to mind for me is Governor Sam Brownback, whom I consider to be a bit of a snake and a bit of a devious person. I disagree with practically everything that he seems to believe in. So, as a person who has a job of showing my point of view in a cartoon, I'm going to look at that guy, Governor Brownback, and I'm going to look at his face carefully, and I'm going to say, I think he's a snake. What should I exaggerate to make him look more like a snake? Wichita is populated with Midwesterners, and Midwesterners, to me, are very open and honest and forthright people, from the get-go when you first meet them. They're not like Southerners that I'm used to, who have a veneer of Southern hospitality, blah, 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 but are really very cliquish and suspicious of outsiders. I found that in Wichita it was not that way. I remember telling people that I corresponded with back in Tennessee, is like, Midwesterners are really kind of cool. What you see is what you get. I've been associated with KMUW for a long time before I got laid off at the Eagle. I always, they called me, I don't know, 10 or 15 years before I got laid off, when they were having their fund drive, to come in and just sort of shoot the bull and try to raise money for them, like so many people do. And that's how I got to know the staff and the community that KMUW has. And then when I got laid off, one of them, I think it was Lou Ann Stevens, contacted me about becoming a commentator for the radio station, and I don't know if they, as I recall, I know that they had Rob Simon do a wonderful job for them for many years, but they had sort of stopped having commentaries, and then they called me to come and maybe do one every other week. And I was like, what the hell? Yeah, let's try it. Sounds strange, but interesting. And it didn't take me long, maybe one or two times of doing it, before I realized I love this. This is fun. This is really fun stuff. So then I got to incorporate my music into my commentaries, which was fun for me. I had done political cartoons where I did takeoffs on song lyrics in my cartoon, but I didn't get to sing it, the way I can now.